I was in the kitchen, scrubbing the last bit of grease off the frying pan when Emily walked in. She was already dressed like she was heading to a fancy cocktail party, her tight black dress and high heels clicking against the floor as though she'd just stepped out of a magazine. I glanced up, half expecting her to comment on dinner or the mess I'd made in the kitchen, but she didn't. Instead, she leaned against the counter, casually fixing her lipstick in the reflection of the microwave. Then, as if she was talking about the weather, she said, "I'm going out after work tomorrow and won't be back until the next day." My hand froze mid-scrub. I blinked, trying to process what she had just said, thinking maybe I'd misheard her. "What do you mean, a work trip?" I asked, even though I knew her job didn't involve overnight travel. Emily was an accountant. Spreadsheets didn't require late-night sessions or overnight stays. "No, just going out," she replied, tossing her lipstick back into her purse without even looking at me. It wasn't what she said that hurt, it was the indifference. Like I didn't deserve an explanation, like it was something I should just accept. I stood there, waiting for her to give me more, some kind of reason or maybe even a joke, but she just grabbed her car keys and threw them into the same gym bag she always used. The silence between us was thick enough to suffocate me. Going where? I tried to keep my voice calm, though inside, I felt a storm brewing. "Out with friends," she finally said, meeting my eyes with a flat expression. "I told you already." And just like that, she turned on her heels and headed for the door, as if it was nothing. Maybe some guys would have let it go. Maybe they trusted their wives enough not to question it. But I wasn't that guy, not anymore. Emily had been acting strange for months. She was always on her phone, locking it the moment I walked into the room. She texted late at night and left for the gym at odd hours, coming back looking more refreshed than sweaty. As soon as the door clicked shut behind her, a heat rose in my chest. I wasn't the jealous type, or at least I hadn't been, but something about this wasn't right. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through our text messages. Nothing unusual, just short replies, the typical one-word answers she'd been giving me lately. But then I saw it, last Friday, when she said she was working late. She had texted, heading to the gym after. "Don't wait up." And now, thinking back, she didn't come home sweaty. Hell, she didn't even have her gym bag that night. It wasn't adding up. That gut feeling, the one that tells you when you're being lied to, hit me hard. But I couldn't accuse her without proof. That's when the idea came to me. Maybe it was stupid, but I needed to know. I pulled her gym bag from the closet and unzipped it. No gym clothes. No sneakers. No water bottle. Just a neatly folded blouse, a pair of heels, and a box of breath mints. Breath mints. Who the hell brings those to the gym? The next morning, I could barely focus on anything. My mind kept circling back to the contents of Emily's gym bag, the blouse, the heels, and those breath mints. I felt the rising frustration sitting heavy in my chest. Maybe I was overreacting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I needed to know. I couldn't live in the dark anymore. That evening, Emily came home from work as if everything was normal. She didn't even glance in my direction as she breezed through the door, dropping her purse on the counter like she had a million times before. But I was done pretending that things were fine. I stood up from the couch, blocking her path to the hallway. "Emily," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "We need to talk." She paused, narrowing her eyes at me. "What now?" she replied with a hint of annoyance, like I was interrupting her plans. "Where were you last night?" I asked, staring her down. "And don't tell me the gym." For a second, I thought I saw her falter. Her eyes darted to the side, just for a moment, before she crossed her arms defensively. "I told you, Jack," she sighed, brushing past me toward the kitchen. "I was out with friends." I followed her, refusing to let her slip away from the conversation. "Friends? Who? And since when do you take heels and a change of clothes to meet friends after work?" She stopped, her back to me, and I could see the tension in her shoulders. She was quiet for a moment, long enough for me to feel the air in the room thicken. Finally, she turned around, her expression calm, too calm. "Why are you snooping through my things?" "I wasn't snooping," I shot back, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. "You're hiding something, Emily. You've been acting weird for months. You're always on your phone, always out late, and your excuses don't add up." So, I looked. What else was I supposed to do? Her face hardened, lips pressed into a thin line. "You're paranoid, Jack. I told you, I've been busy. Work's been stressful, and I needed some time to blow off steam." "Blow off steam?" My pulse quickened, and I took a step closer. "That's not an answer. Where were you last night, Emily?" She rolled her eyes and turned back to the counter, grabbing a glass of water like we were discussing something trivial. "I don't have to explain every minute of my day to you, Jack." Something snapped in me right then. I slammed my hand down on the counter, the loud crack of impact jolting through the air. "You do when it looks like you're sneaking around behind my back." "Who are you seeing, Emily?" The words were out before I could stop them. It was a direct accusation, something I hadn't intended to say so bluntly, but I couldn't hold it in any longer. Emily didn't flinch. Instead, she stared at me, her eyes cold and unreadable. "You're being ridiculous," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I'm not seeing anyone. You're blowing this way out of proportion." But I didn't believe her. Not anymore. There was something about her tone, the way she deflected every question like it didn't matter, that told me she was hiding something. "You think I'm just going to ignore this?" I demanded. "You think you can walk in here, lie to my face, and I'll let it slide?" She set the glass down, turning to face me fully, arms crossed over her chest. "I don't know what you want from me, Jack. I've told you everything you need to know. If you can't handle that, then maybe this is your problem, not mine." My heart pounded in my chest, anger and disbelief swirling inside me. Was she really going to stand there and try to make me feel like I was the crazy one? Like I was the one overreacting? I opened my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. There was nothing more to say. She had built a wall between us, and I couldn't break through it. Not yet, at least. Emily turned on her heels and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there in the silence. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The next few days felt like a fog, but I couldn't shake the tension that had settled between us. Emily's coldness, her blatant avoidance, it was all like nails in my gut. I knew something was going on, but every time I tried to press her for answers, she just shrugged me off, turning the tables like I was the one with the problem. I couldn't sit back and wait for her to make a mistake. I needed answers, and I was going to find them. So, one evening, while she was in the shower, I did something I never thought I'd do. I took her phone. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through her messages, half expecting to find nothing, maybe hoping to find nothing. But that hope was shattered when I opened her texts. It wasn't anything obvious, not at first. No strange numbers, no scandalous conversations. But then I saw his name, Mark. There was nothing incriminating at the surface level, just casual chats like they were friends or coworkers. But I could feel it in my gut, this wasn't just an innocent friendship. I scrolled deeper, reading between the lines of their exchanges. Late-night messages, inside jokes that I had no clue about, and then, the photos. Not of them together, but of her, Emily, smiling, in places I didn't recognize. Dressed up. Looking different. She never looked like that when we went out. It was like she'd become someone else when she was with him. My mind raced. Who was this guy? How long had this been going on? And why didn't I notice it sooner? I set the phone down, my hands trembling as the realization washed over me. This wasn't just a harmless friendship. Emily had lied to me about her gym nights, about her late work hours. She was spending time with him. And the worst part? She didn't even care enough to hide it well. She'd grown so comfortable with her lies that she thought I wouldn't notice. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at her phone. I had the proof, but what was I supposed to do with it? Should I confront her right then and there? Or wait, gather more, and catch her in the act? Before I could decide, I heard the water shut off in the bathroom. My heart raced as I quickly put her phone back in place and sat down on the couch, pretending like I hadn't just uncovered her secrets. Emily walked out, towel wrapped around her body, her damp hair falling in waves. She glanced at me, but there was no warmth in her eyes, no sense of guilt. Just the same indifference she'd shown me for weeks. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice casual, like I wasn't crumbling inside. "Yeah," I muttered, my voice tight. "Everything's fine." But it wasn't. Everything was far from fine, and now I knew I couldn't just sit by and let her play me for a fool. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while Emily slept soundly beside me. I wanted to confront her, to shake her awake and demand the truth, but something in me hesitated. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the shock of realizing that the woman I thought I knew was slipping away, one lie at a time. I needed a plan. I couldn't confront her yet, not until I knew everything. And that meant digging deeper, finding out who this Mark was and just how far things had gone between them. If Emily thought she could keep me in the dark, she was wrong. The next day, I couldn't shake the images from Emily's phone, the photos of her looking like someone I didn't recognize, the casual, almost flirty messages exchanged with Mark. I knew I was getting close to the truth, but I needed more. I had to see for myself, confirm that what I feared was real. So that evening, when Emily left for her supposed gym session, I decided to follow her. It felt like something straight out of a bad movie, but I didn't care. I needed answers, and I wasn't getting them from Emily. I waited until she was out the door, her gym bag slung over her shoulder like she had nothing to hide. As soon as she pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed my keys and followed at a safe distance, trying to stay far enough behind her that she wouldn't notice. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of fear and adrenaline coursing through me. Emily didn't head to the gym. I wasn't surprised. She drove across town, weaving through traffic with the same ease as if she was running an everyday errand. After about 20 minutes, she pulled into the parking lot of a high-end restaurant. The kind of place we hadn't been to in months. I parked a few cars away and watched as she stepped out of the car, adjusting her outfit in the window's reflection. No gym clothes. No sneakers. She was dressed to impress, heels, makeup perfectly done, her hair styled with care. She wasn't meeting friends or working out. She was meeting him. I waited, my knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel. And then, right on cue, he appeared. Mark. I watched as he walked toward Emily, his hand sliding to the small of her back as they walked inside together, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. The pit in my stomach twisted into something darker. This wasn't some casual fling. This wasn't an emotional connection or whatever excuse Emily might try to feed me. She was with him, out in public, with no shame, like they were the only two people who mattered. Like I didn't exist. I sat in the car for a few minutes, trying to decide what to do next. Part of me wanted to storm inside, cause a scene, and confront them right there in the middle of the restaurant. But another part of me knew that wasn't the way. I needed to think, to plan, to understand just how deep this betrayal went before I made my move. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to drive away. The anger was boiling inside me, but I knew I couldn't let it cloud my judgment. Not yet. I needed to be smart about this. But as I drove home, one thing was crystal clear: the woman I thought I married was gone. Emily had been lying to me for months, maybe even longer, and the truth was finally out in the open. I sat in the living room that night, the house eerily quiet around me. Emily didn't come home until after midnight, and when she did, she acted like nothing had changed, like she hadn't just spent the evening with another man. She kicked off her heels, tossed her bag on the floor, and didn't even glance in my direction as she headed to the bedroom. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I couldn't. But as I listened to the sound of her brushing her teeth, her routine so normal, so practiced, it hit me: this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't some lapse in judgment or a moment of weakness. Emily had made her choice. She had chosen him. And now, it was time for me to choose what came next. The next morning, I woke up with the heavy weight of realization pressing down on me. There was no going back now. I'd seen everything I needed to see. Emily's betrayal wasn't just in my head, it was real, and it was happening right in front of me. My mind churned, replaying the events of the previous night on an endless loop. Every laugh she shared with Mark, every casual touch, every lie she had fed me over the past months burned deeper. Emily moved around the kitchen like nothing was wrong. She poured her coffee, skimmed through her phone, completely indifferent to the tension filling the room. I had tried to keep calm, but watching her act like everything was fine pushed me past the breaking point. "Emily," I finally said, my voice steady but cold. "We need to talk." She barely glanced up from her phone. "What is it this time, Jack?" I could feel my hands tightening into fists, my heart pounding in my chest. "I know about you and Mark." That got her attention. She slowly put down her phone, eyes narrowing as she studied me. "What are you talking about?" "I followed you last night," I said, staring her down. "I saw you with him. Don't bother denying it." For a split second, I thought I saw guilt flicker across her face, but it vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. Instead, she crossed her arms and sighed, like she was being forced into a conversation she didn't want to have. "So, what? You're spying on me now?" I shook my head, frustration bubbling over. "Don't try to turn this around on me, Emily. I'm not the one sneaking around, lying, and meeting someone else behind my spouse's back. How long has this been going on?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out the window, her face tightening with something I couldn't quite read. "It's not what you think," she finally muttered, though the words felt hollow. "Then what is it, Emily?" I demanded. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're having an affair." She turned back to face me, her expression shifting from guilt to something harder. "Jack, I'm not going to stand here and defend myself to you. You've been checked out of this marriage for a long time. We're barely even the same people we were when we started this." I blinked, shocked by how easily she was deflecting the blame. "That's your excuse? That's why you're seeing him?" "It's not an excuse," she shot back, her voice rising. "It's the truth. You're never around. You're always focused on work or on your own problems. I felt invisible in this marriage, Jack. Like I didn't matter. So you thought cheating would fix that?" I said, my voice dripping with disbelief. "You think sneaking around behind my back would solve everything?" Her jaw clenched, and for a moment, I saw something in her eyes, anger, frustration, maybe even regret, but it wasn't enough. "I didn't plan for this to happen," she said, her voice quieting. "But Mark, he listens. He makes me feel like I'm worth something again. He sees me in ways you don't anymore." Her words cut through me like a knife. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was standing there, justifying her betrayal, blaming me for not being enough, for not seeing her the way she wanted to be seen. I wanted to scream, to tell her that she was wrong, that I had been trying, that I had loved her more than anything. But instead, I just stood there, stunned into silence. "So, what now?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Are you leaving me for him? Was this your plan all along?" Emily shook her head, looking almost bored with the conversation. "I don't know, Jack. I don't know what I want anymore." The indifference in her voice was the final blow. She didn't care about me, about us. I had been replaced, and she didn't even have the decency to feel guilty about it. I turned away, not trusting myself to speak. My chest was tight, my mind racing with 1,000 different emotions, but one thing was clear: this wasn't the woman I had married. This was someone else, someone who didn't care about the vows we had made or the life we had built together. I walked out of the kitchen, leaving Emily behind, her cold, indifferent stare following me as I went. This was the moment everything changed. And no matter what happened next, I knew there was no going back. I sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My head was spinning, trying to process what had just happened. Emily had essentially confessed, no apologies, no remorse, just cold, emotionless justification. She had looked me in the eye and blamed me for everything, like her affair was my fault, like I had somehow pushed her into Mark's arms. I couldn't believe how calm she had been. It was like she had rehearsed those lines, playing them over and over in her head until she believed them. But now that I had the truth, now that I knew the woman I thought I loved was betraying me, I was left with nothing but a sense of emptiness. A deep, gut-wrenching emptiness that I couldn't shake. I didn't know where to go. Home wasn't an option. I couldn't face her again, not after that conversation. I drove aimlessly for a while, the streets blurring together as my thoughts spiraled. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. Eventually, I pulled into a quiet parking lot. I didn't even know where I was. I just needed to stop, to sit and let the reality of it all sink in. I had tried so hard to hold on to the idea that maybe this was a misunderstanding, maybe I could fix things, but Emily's indifference had shattered that illusion. She didn't want to fix anything. She didn't even care enough to fight for our marriage. I leaned back in the seat and stared at the ceiling of the car, trying to breathe through the knot tightening in my chest. The betrayal went deeper than I thought. Emily hadn't just been lying to me about Mark, she had been lying to me about who she was, about everything we had built together. I picked up my phone and scrolled through her texts again, looking for more clues. My stomach churned as I found them, more messages from Mark, more plans to meet up, more inside jokes that I was never part of. There were messages that dated back months. I felt sick. How long had this been going on? How many times had she looked me in the eye and lied to my face, pretending that everything was normal? Then, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A message from Emily to Mark, sent just a week ago, "Wish you could come home with me tonight. I can't wait to see you again." Home. She had wanted to bring him to our home. Our home, the place where we had shared so much, where we had built a life together. She had wanted him there, in the space that was supposed to be ours. I felt the heat of anger rise inside me, burning away the numbness that had settled in earlier. This wasn't just an affair, it was a complete betrayal of everything we had built together. She had disrespected our life, our home, and she didn't even care. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling the weight of the realization crash over me. I had been living in a lie for months, maybe even longer. Emily had checked out of our marriage long before I had noticed, and by the time I had started to see the signs, it was too late. She had already moved on, and I was just the last obstacle standing in her way. The anger bubbled up inside me, threatening to explode. I needed to do something, anything, to release the frustration and rage that had been building. I wanted to confront her again, to demand answers, to make her see what she had done to me. But what good would that do? She had already made her choice, and I wasn't part of it. I put my phone down, trying to calm myself. My mind raced with questions. How had I let this happen? How had I missed the signs? And most importantly, what was I supposed to do now? There was no easy answer. The life I had known was gone, torn apart by Emily's betrayal. And the woman I thought I loved had turned into a stranger. I sat there for hours, the weight of the truth settling deeper with every passing minute. There was no going back now. I had seen too much, learned too much. My marriage was over, and all that was left was figuring out how to pick up the pieces and move on. I spent the next few days in a haze, my emotions swinging between rage and despair. Emily continued to act like nothing had changed, like her cold confession didn't mean our entire life together had been built on lies. She moved around the house with an eerie calmness, almost as if she were waiting for me to make the next move. But I wasn't ready to confront her again, not yet. I needed answers, real answers, and I knew Emily wasn't going to give them to me. I had to get them from the source. And that meant facing Mark. I'd thought about it for days, rehearsing what I would say, imagining every scenario. I wasn't even sure what I wanted from him, an apology? An explanation? Maybe I just wanted to look him in the eye and see the man who had helped destroy my marriage. One evening, after confirming their next meeting from her phone, I made my decision. I drove to the upscale bar where I knew Emily and Mark were planning to meet. My hands were shaking as I parked the car, adrenaline coursing through me like wildfire. I wasn't sure what I was going to do when I saw him, but I couldn't stop myself from going inside. The bar was dimly lit, with the kind of atmosphere that encouraged intimate conversations and whispered secrets. I scanned the room, my heart pounding, until I saw him, Mark. He was sitting at the bar, casually sipping his drink like he didn't have a care in the world. Emily hadn't arrived yet. I stood there for a moment, just watching him. He looked exactly how I imagined, tall, confident, like the kind of guy who was used to getting what he wanted. He had a smugness about him, a quiet arrogance that made my blood boil. This was the man who had taken my wife from me, the man who had been sneaking around behind my back for months. I walked over, my pulse racing, and sat down on the stool next to him. For a second, he didn't even look at me. But then I cleared my throat, and his eyes shifted in my direction. At first, there was no recognition, just a polite nod, like I was any other stranger. But then I saw it, the moment it clicked. His smile faltered, and his expression hardened. "You know who I am," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. He set his drink down, his face a mix of confusion and wariness. "Look, man." "No," I interrupted, my voice firm. "You don't get to play dumb. You know exactly who I am." Mark shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable, but he didn't make a move to leave. Instead, he glanced around the bar, as if checking to see if anyone was watching us. "All right," he said finally, his tone low. "What do you want?" "I want to know why," I said, staring him down. "Why her? Why now? Why destroy my marriage?" He sighed, rubbing a hand across his face like he was already tired of the conversation. "Look, man, I didn't mean for this to happen. It just did." "That's not an answer," I snapped. "You don't just accidentally sleep with someone else's wife for months. You made a choice." He didn't deny it. Instead, he stared at his drink, avoiding my gaze. "I didn't set out to hurt you. It wasn't about you." I couldn't help but laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Wasn't about me?" I repeated, my voice full of disbelief. "You didn't think about the fact that you were wrecking my life? You didn't think about what it would do to me?" Mark finally looked at me, his expression hardening again. "I'm not the only one who made choices here, man. You think this is all on me? She came to me. She wanted this." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew it was true, Emily had made her own choices, too, but hearing it from him, hearing him so casually deflect the blame, made my blood boil. I wanted to hit him, to knock that smug look off his face, but I held myself back. "Barely. So what now?" I asked, my voice tight with anger. "You just keep seeing her? Keep sneaking around behind my back?" He shrugged. "I don't know, man. That's up to her." I stared at him, disbelief flooding through me. This guy didn't care about me, about Emily, about anything. He was just going along with it, enjoying whatever thrill he got from sneaking around, and he wasn't even sorry for it. I stood up, my fists clenched at my sides. "Stay away from her," I said through gritted teeth. "This isn't over." Mark didn't say a word as I walked away. But I could feel his eyes on me, watching as I left the bar. My mind was racing, my emotions all over the place. I didn't get the answers I wanted, but I knew one thing for sure, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. After confronting Mark, I thought I'd feel some kind of relief, like I'd finally taken control of the situation. But as I drove home, the weight of it all sank even deeper. The encounter with him wasn't satisfying, it wasn't even a confrontation. It was more like talking to a brick wall. He didn't care. To him, this was just another game, and I was just another player being forced to deal with the consequences. But Emily, she was different. She was the one who chose to destroy what we had, and I couldn't stop thinking about the way she had brushed everything off like it didn't matter. like we didn't matter. When I got home, the house felt colder, emptier than ever. The air was thick with tension, and the silence between us was deafening. Emily was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. She didn't even look up when I walked in. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at her, trying to figure out what to say. Part of me wanted to demand answers, to push her until she admitted to everything, but another part of me knew it wouldn't matter. She had made up her mind. She had chosen Mark over me. What more was there to say? Emily, I finally said, breaking the silence. She didn't respond right away, just glanced up from her phone with an expression that made my blood boil. It was the same look she'd been giving me for weeks, indifference. What? I stood there, my fists clenched at my sides, trying to keep my voice steady. We need to talk. I went to see Mark tonight. That got her attention. Her eyes widened for a split second, and I could see the flicker of something, guilt, maybe fear, before she masked it with a sigh. So now you're stalking him too? I needed to hear it from him, I replied coldly. And I did. He told me everything. Emily didn't flinch. She just set her phone down on the coffee table, crossing her arms. And? I repeated, feeling the anger rising again. That's all you have to say? I know you've been seeing him for months, Emily. I know you've been lying to me, sneaking around behind my back. Is this how you want it to end? She didn't answer right away, just looked at me with that same blank expression. I don't know what you expect me to say, Jack. I've told you before, it's not just about you. I'm not happy, okay? I haven't been for a long time. Her words hit like a hammer. She wasn't even trying to fight for us. She wasn't making excuses or begging for forgiveness. She was just done. And that hurt more than anything. You could have told me that, I said, my voice quiet, almost pleading. You could have told me you were unhappy. We could have worked on it. But you didn't. You just left. Emily shook her head, her eyes cold. I didn't leave, Jack. I'm still here, aren't I? That's not what I mean, and you know it, I replied, my voice cracking with frustration. You've been checked out for months. You're here physically, but that's it. Mentally, emotionally, you're gone. She shrugged, like she couldn't care less. Maybe I am. I don't know what you want from me, Jack. I don't have the answers you're looking for. I stood there, the silence stretching between us, and I realized in that moment that she wasn't going to fight for this. She wasn't going to admit she was wrong, or even try to make things right. This was who she was now, someone I didn't recognize, someone who didn't care about the life we had built together. So what now? I asked, my voice heavy with defeat. Do we just keep pretending everything's fine until one of us finally leaves? Is that the plan? Emily didn't answer for a long time. She just stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then, finally, she spoke. I don't know, Jack. Maybe it's time we stop pretending. Those words hung in the air like a death sentence. I knew what they meant. She was done. And in that moment, I realized that maybe I was too. There was nothing left to fight for, not if she didn't want it. I looked at her one last time, trying to find any trace of the woman I had fallen in love with, but she was gone. Whatever we had once had, whatever had kept us together for all those years, it was over. I'm leaving, I said quietly, turning toward the door. I'll pack my things tomorrow. Emily didn't try to stop me. She didn't say a word. And as I walked out the door, the weight of the decision crashed over me. This was it. Our marriage was over, and there was no going back. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet as I packed my things. The sound of my footsteps echoed through the empty rooms, a painful reminder of everything I was leaving behind. Emily was in the bedroom, barely acknowledging me as I moved around the house, stuffing clothes and belongings into bags. It was strange how easily everything had come undone, how quickly we'd gone from being a married couple to two strangers under the same roof. I hadn't said much to her since our conversation the night before. What was there to say? We were both done, and pretending otherwise would just prolong the inevitable. She didn't even ask me where I was going, and I didn't feel the need to tell her. It didn't matter anymore. I needed to be anywhere but here, far away from the lies, the betrayal, and the woman who had ripped apart everything we had built together. As I packed the last of my things, I glanced around the living room one last time. The pictures on the walls, photos of us smiling at family gatherings, vacations we'd taken together, moments that now felt like they belonged to someone else, stared back at me like ghosts. I pulled one down, staring at the version of Emily I once knew. In the photo, she looked happy, her smile wide and genuine, her arm wrapped around me like we were inseparable. But that woman didn't exist anymore, and neither did the life we had shared. I tossed the photo into the box and shut it. When I finally walked out the front door, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, but at the same time, an overwhelming emptiness settled in my chest. The life I had known was gone, but I wasn't sure if I was ready for what came next. I tossed my bags into the trunk of the car and climbed into the driver's seat, staring at the house for a moment longer. The place where we had built our life together, where we had shared so many memories, was just another part of the past now. A past I was leaving behind. I started the car and drove away without looking back. For the next few days, I stayed at a motel on the outskirts of town, avoiding calls from friends and family. I wasn't ready to explain everything, wasn't ready to admit out loud what had happened. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily and Mark, laughing together like they didn't have a care in the world, and it felt like the wound was being ripped open all over again. But eventually, I knew I couldn't hide forever. Life didn't stop just because my marriage had fallen apart, and I needed to figure out what came next. So, I reached out to an old friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Chris had always been there for me, back before everything with Emily had taken over my life. We'd lost touch over the years, but when I called, he picked up on the first ring. "Hey, man," he said, his voice warm and familiar. "It's been a while. How are you?" I hesitated for a moment, not sure how to answer. How do you explain to someone that your entire life has fallen apart? "I've been better," I finally admitted. Chris didn't push for details. Instead, he invited me over, no questions asked. That's what I'd always liked about him. He never pried, never judged. He just let you be. And right now, that's exactly what I needed. When I arrived at his place, Chris greeted me with a beer and a hug, no words needed. We sat on the porch for hours, talking about everything and nothing. Eventually, I told him about Emily, about the affair, the lies, and how everything had crumbled. He listened without interrupting, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. "I'm sorry, man," he said after I'd finished. "That's rough. But you're going to get through it. You're stronger than you think." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed him. Everything still felt raw, like I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't quite see, and I had no idea what was waiting for me on the other side. But sitting there with Chris, I realized that maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. We spent the next few days hanging out, going to old spots we used to visit when life was simpler. It wasn't a solution to everything, but it was a start. Being around Chris reminded me of who I was before everything had gone wrong, and for the first time in a long time, I started to feel like I could move forward. Slowly, but surely. The pain of Emily's betrayal still lingered, but each day, it hurt a little less. I knew it would take time, but I also knew I couldn't let it define me forever. There was life after Emily. I just had to figure out what it looked like.